Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over my buy list for the Paradox Rift expansion. This is a super impactful set. There's so many great budding new archetypes thanks to the Pokemon in this set, but there's also some fantastic trainer cards which can go into existing archetypes as well. So let's get into those core essentials. These are cards that I expect to be involved in tier 1 or 2 contenders or have obvious future potential. And we're going to start off with the sort of ancient package, the Roaring Moon deck, kind of being the front-runner aggro archetype from this new set, where we are going to be needing 4 copies of that Roaring Moon EX. It's likely that we're going to play a Pokestock-based build, so you want the full 4 copies in case you mill one of your attackers, so you still have plenty to go a lot of the time, I feel like. There could be other stadiums, of course, that go in this archetype. I've also seen things like Town Store, Beach Court even I've seen in here as well, so there are different ways of playing this, but regardless, you want to have really early access to your main attacker because you not only want 1 in the early stages, you want to have 2 of them in play so you can get full value with your Professor Sada's Vitality, which is attaching to 2 of your ancient Pokemon at once. So maximum copies of this card as well as the Sada because it's the main energy acceleration that we have from this set, as well as Dark Patch, which is going to keep the Roaring Moon deck functional. Going to go for 3 copies of the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule. I don't think I'll ever really make space for 4 copies, even though it is a great hit point buff for both of your ancient attackers really in here. It also allows you to push your Toxic Powder from Brute Bonnet in order to change your damage output with the Bonnet itself to 130, which is a key threshold, as well as Calamity Storm going up to 110 without having to discard a Stadium, or 230, helping you deal with opposing Roaring Moon, Iron Hands, which is on this slide, and there are also a number of V Pokemon that have 230 hit points as well, so the capsule is helping you stay out of range of certain things, but also allowing you to then knock out things more cleanly, which I think is pretty relevant. I think 2 copies of Brute Bonnet is probably the highest end you're going to need. This Toxic Powder is decent in the Roaring Moon deck as a single prize attacking option that can deal with other single prizes. So when we are getting down to the latter stages of the game, you can go for a poke with Brute Bonnet just to take a single prize card knockout and hope to like throw an Ono at the opponent and hope they can't Boss's Orders you to close out the game, which is nice. At the same time, there are some other more niche combinations like Clorf from this set, as well as the Terastal Serena EX. So there could be other avenues for Brute Bonnet to see some play. We've already started to see some results from Japan, and I've also even seen that Hisuian Electrode has had some results with this combination. So the Capsule Bonnet isn't exclusive to the Roaring Moon archetype. You may want to pick these up if you want to try out some other creative combos in there as well. And Morpeko, I actually didn't have this on our set review. I hang my head in shame because Morpeko has already started to see some results, and I'm starting to see why actually. So just a quick refresher on Morpeko. It has no retreat cost if it has no energy attached to it, so it can be a pivot for the Roaring Moon deck, and for 2 Darkness Energy you deal 70 and can move the 2 energy from the Morpeko onto your benched Pokemon. So this is another really good single prizer that you can use in the deck to be a pivot throughout the entire game, but also lets you initiate a prize race into lots of evolving basic Pokemon whilst not throwing a Roaring Moon into the firing line, so is again going to be helpful and try and skew that prize map as well. So the Morpeko seems like a really good probable one of, but could be as many as 2 counts in the Roaring Moon deck. I've only just started to experiment with this card, but I think it was definitely worth mentioning, and I think it probably will make the cut actually in the Roaring Moon deck. In hindsight now, I probably would have put it as like a 3 or 4 star in the set review, because I think it probably does go into a number of Roaring Moon builds, so really something to take note of there. There's also the Earthen Vessel card. This will certainly go in the Roaring Moon deck, but it just seems to be one of the most versatile cards in the game anyway. You discard a card in order to search your deck for 2 basic energy, put them straight into the hand. Guaranteeing energy attachments is busted. Radiant Greninja is in so many decks, so you are always cycling with this card as well. You're naturally thinning the deck as you go, and it also opens the door for us to play multi-type decks, even if it's just like techs, like Iron Hands EX, Radiant Charizard. These sorts of really powerful attackers could be that secondary energy type that you have in your deck list alongside your whatever primary colour within the list, and the Earthen Vessel makes that much more consistent, so seems like a really, really powerful card and super versatile going forward. There's some other interesting evolutions. The Goldengo EX, I would say if you are going to play a build around this, you want to have the full 4 copies. I would pick up both Gimmighoul. The 50 hit point one has a much better attack and just 1 retreat cost, which will be relevant depending on what sort of supporting Pokemon you have with your Goldengo, whereas the other Gimmighoul has a 2 retreat cost, a useless attack, but has an extra 20 hit points, which could be handy if you're worried about Iron Valiance matchups, for example. So I feel like that could be, again, a go-to option for certain builds of Goldengo. I've tried out a few different variations. If there are good Pokemon to retreat into, you probably want the 50 hit pointer. If you are just going like quad, Gimmighoul, Goldengo, whatever else, have very few backup attackers, that sort of thing, or want to pad out your list with like cross switchers or other switch outs, you can go down the heavier, bulkier Gimmighoul route instead. But seems like a pretty powerful archetype. You have lots of inbuilt draw power, which is always great to see. You have one-hit KO potential, which is obviously dangerous. So a lot to like about the Goldengo deck. Xatu also seems really powerful. I would go for a 4/4 count of this. It's just going to be a holo, I would imagine. It's also a pre-release card. Really great energy acceleration plus draw power baked into a single prize Pokemon. Lots of things you love to see here. I feel like it's going to work very well with Iron Valiant, as well as a sort of toolbox of other psychic attacking Pokemon. And I imagine that's going to be the primary way that we see this see success, alongside multiple Valiants, which we'll get onto now. Very, very powerful future EX Pokemon. It's likely going to work in the Xatu deck, where it can attack as well as use its Tachyon Bits ability, and really control many board states. If you're able to spam enough of these Tachyon Bits in the opening stages, you can take easy knockouts on evolving Pokemon and deny maybe engines from certain archetypes, or just deny other setup Pokemon or some crucial attacking lines as well. Anytime you can take an easy prize is just going to be really helpful, and it can also set you up for Medicham plays with Yoga Loop, be it in a purely Rapid Strike based build with Urshifu and Medicham as your actual attackers, utilizing that Rapid Strike energy. That could certainly be one direction, but also we could have a mini Medicham package even in the Xatu builds, to really just take out some early KOs as well and get an additional turn out of it, which is a huge bonus for you. The Iron Hands EX I recommend getting 2 copies of. It's more likely going to be a tech style attacker in a number of these archetypes, but because it has 3 colorless in its attack cost for the amp you very much, it just becomes so versatile. You could make an argument for it in so many decks, because we have such incredible energy acceleration in the game right now. We have Mirage Gate, we have Flaffy, we have Xatu, we have Charizard, we have Lugia, we have Baxcalibur. There's so many ways you can try and build this card. And taking extra prize cards can really fix your prize map if you don't have a boss's orders on a crucial turn, or it can just help you continue to race effectively and reduce the game down to as few turns as possible. And the Future Booster Energy Capsule is also a fantastic tool for the future stuff. It's going to give your future Pokemon free retreat, and it also buffs their damage output by 20. I think this is most relevant for Iron Valiant, because again, Hands is probably more of a tech attacking Pokemon, but it's so good for Iron Valiant. It pushes the Laser Blade into 220 thresholds to help you deal with most EXs and basic V Pokemon, but also with Tachyon Bits, you can then push into range of the Iron Hands, the Roaring Moons, those sorts of Pokemon, which is amazing, and it also gives you a free retreat pivot to, again, spam those Tachyon Bits for as long as possible across the game, so that's going to be exceptional. If you are playing a package of like Arven or Town Store, it could even be a tech inclusion with Iron Hands as well, because pushing yourself up to 140 does allow you to knock out some additional basic Pokemon, but also allows you to knock out a Pidgeot EX for a 3 prize turn, which would be pretty filthy. Also really good against Lugia as well, of course, so that would be massive. Some other really interesting trainer cards. The TM Evolution, I think, is a real winner from this set. I think it's the optimal way to play Gardevoir going forward. I also think it could end up being the best way to play Goldengo. I'm still sort of judging that whether or not an Irida or Arven package is best, but certainly gives you a fantastic going second play where you can Arven for VIP pass plus evolution and get double stage 1s into play quite early. This could be really nice for barrel engines as well. It could be really nice for Zoroark archetypes. Even having like a Curlier engine in single prize decks just for draw power. I think it opens up so many avenues, and I think Arven is really getting a massive buff from this set, thanks to, in part, this tool card. Countercatcher, I'm saying 4 copies, mostly for control. I feel like you can probably sculpt a decent control archetype out of this set, and I think Countercatcher will be the reason to do that. If you're not looking to play control, I would say 2 copies is still a pretty good pickup. There's enough Irida or Arven engines out there where this is a pretty handy card just to have in the deck list. There's a number of evolving archetypes, and all of these would love to have an item-based Gust rather than being forced to use boss's orders. It means that you can play those draw supporters and other stuff and still have a Countercatcher play on the turn. It also can completely swing board states if you go Countercatcher plus Iono in certain instances, taking out Engine Mons on the same turn and leaving your opponent with pretty poor board states if they've overcommitted in certain ways. I also think this card could end up being like a 2-count quite happily in Giratina, alongside or possibly even instead of boss's orders. because it's just an easier card to weave in when you are using Chorus on the opening turns of the game. So it allows that Giratina to just be far more aggressive on the comeback as soon as it gets to 7 cards in the Lost Zone. Professor Churro's Scenario I think is a really solid card. Could be, again, good for some controlling archetypes. I think it does compete with Penny in a bit of an awkward way, but I also think the reason why I'm giving it that 2 count is that it could easily go into Gardevoir as a 1 copy, Charizard as a 1 copy as well, and it just has that versatility of picking up lots of Pokemon, can fix a board state, would also allow you to tank with certain Pokemon, and again remove those prize cards from play, which I think is pretty massive, to be honest with you. Then we have some great tech Pokemon. The Iron Bundle is a searchable means of pushing the opponent's active Pokemon out of the way, and with Super Rods and such, we could have Recycle for this card as well, so I do think it is reasonable. I think most of the time it's not as effective as just having an escape rope, but its searchability is what makes me consider this card a really good binder copy. The Tapu Koko EX seems like a really good defensive card that Miraidon players could use, especially alongside Judge or Iono. Plus Path of the Peak, you can go for paralysis plays and set things up for KOs, especially the bigger Pokemon in the game like Charizard EX. This could be massive, because the Miraidon deck sometimes can struggle to knock out these all in one turn, so setting it up over 2 turns can be really a great way to go about things and keep you in games. And then the Jirachi is another big tech Pokemon. That Stellar Veil is going to give us a really helpful safeguard against basic Pokemon that have effects of attacks. We're looking at Medicham V with that Yoga Loop. I've just mentioned how Tachyon Bits can be so dangerous with that combination for evolving decks, certainly. I also think that the Shadow Rider Calyrex V could also be very scary in Xatu-based builds of Iron Valiant. And I'm also very aware of Sableye, of course, when we're looking at playing Gardevoir, when we're looking at playing Charizard. You know that a Sableye can sometimes get very creative and take multiple prize knockouts. Well, a Jirachi is a really great way that you can deny that from the opponent and really limit their attacking options, especially when you're hitting them with low hand sizes, so seems to be a really solid play. Onto the Believer buy list then, we have some pretty interesting EX Pokemon, which I feel don't quite make the cut, but are all still interesting. The Serena EX can put Pokemon down to 30 hit points remaining, and that's not only limited to the active either, so it is a very dangerous attack text. It might need some extra synergy cards going on in here. Possibly Brute Bonnet with Radiant Sneasler could finish off Pokemon, meaning that for 1 energy, you're able to knock out your opponent's active no matter their hit points every single turn, which is pretty interesting. Or we could try and have more control-y defensive builds utilizing the Panic Mask in the deck list, so that once you've tagged a certain Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field, they can no longer attack into your Serena, which could be a really handy way of limiting your opponent's options. The Skeledirge EX is also pretty interesting. That Metal type coverage is becoming more relevant, seeing as though we have not only Chien Pao EX, but also the Iron Valiant EX now that is weak to it. But it's also got a great way of buffing your damage output, discarding a Fire Energy from hand to give your active Pokemon 60 more damage. This is also stackable as well, so we can create some really cool board states where all sorts of Pokemon can take KOs. Because we're a fire type, the immediate synergy that springs to mind is Magma Basin. We have the likes of Entei, we have the likes of Radiant Charizard, which could be massive. I've even seen this paired with Arceus as well, where you push that pretty mediocre 180 into much more relevant damage output, even from turn 2. If you're able to candy up into a Skeledirge and discard a Fire Energy from your hand, now Arceus could be pressurizing all sorts of EX Pokemon from that second turn in the game, and with your 280 hit points, that's actually pretty relevant as well. Then there's Garchomp EX. For its 1 energy attachment attack, you can accelerate 3 energy from your discard pile to your bench Pokemon in any way that you like, and it's fighting energy acceleration, which is really nice. It could open up some sort of fighting toolbox. I'm looking at Urshifu VMAX, I'm looking at Roaring Resolve Lucario. There's a few ways we can try and go about this to make it all happen, and because Garchomp and even the Radiant Serena, in fairness, they're both water-type terrestrial Pokemon, we could utilize Irida packages to make their turn 2 candy plays pretty consistent. There's also the Aegislash EX down here. There's the annoying Aegislash, the regular one in the set, that can't be hit by your opponent's Pokemon V, which is really helpful, or EX Pokemon, of course. So this is going to be a really annoying wall, especially with 150 hit points. We'll talk about Gorgeous Mantle in a moment, but that could be a great way that you could buff this Pokemon and make it really pesky to get through. The idea being you slam with the Aegislash for as long as possible in the opening stages, because the Aegislash EX has a really good late game attack, which is a 70 times multiplier for each prize card that you have taken. So this can really lead to some exceptional late game board states where you're swinging for huge damage on board and your opponent can't really stop you because you just are a 1 energy attachment away from doing it again the following turn, which is pretty gross, I would say. The Cofagrigus EX is a bit of a throwback to Dragapult VMAX. It only does 110 damage for 2 Psychic, but you can place those 5 counters on your opponent's bench in any way that you like. So we can get quite creative here, especially with Iron Valiant once again helping out to increase that bench control that you can have over your opponents. And the Gold Coffin from Cofagrigus means that when you get knocked out, you can cherry pick a card from your deck and put it immediately into your hand. So as long as you're not facing Path to the Peak, this can give you some really good internal Iono-proofing protection. The Armarouge EX seems to have an obvious combo with the other Armarouge from Scarlet and Violet as well. It has the Crimson Armor, reducing 80 damage if it has no damage counters already on it. So the idea is you're a really chunky EX Pokemon, and your damage output scales with the amount of fire energy that you have attached to it. So we're going to try and use that Fire Alarm from Armarouge, the regular one from Scarlet and Violet, to throw your energy around the board and make sure that you're not overcommitting and making sure you're doing pretty relevant numbers the entire game as your EX's tank, and ideally you're using the likes of Cheryl or Professor Churro to undo that damage that you have in your Armarouge, and then you're sending another one at the opponents to try and make life difficult for them. I feel like it's a bit of a convoluted combo, probably lacks a little bit of draw power here and there, but if someone can make this come off, it could be a pretty reasonable strategy. In the top middle here, we have some pretty interesting disruptive style Pokemon. The Tatsugiri could work in some controlling style archetypes that are using double turbo energy, because you can simply use Tatsugiri to get 2 cards out of your deck, then you jump into the active with a different annoying walling Pokemon. So the likes of Block Snorlax, the likes of Mimikyu, those sorts of Pokemon spring to mind. Even Klefki could be pretty interesting. And this entire time you're thinning your deck of your best cards and making sure you get into the game, which is pretty nice. The Toedscruel is also pretty interesting. This could combine even with Toedscruel EX, where you're starting to create a number of matchups that are actually pretty favorable for you, where you're no longer affected by effects of your opponent's attacks from the EX side of things, and then the Toedscruel from this set says that your opponent can't recover cards from their discard pile from abilities or trainer card effects. This can be really big for a couple of archetypes that do rely on superior energy retrieval, most notably the Chien-Pao archetype as well as the Goldengo archetype will be quite stifled without access to these cards. Then we have the Crobat from the set, also pretty disruptive, and also has a pretty decent evolution line, as we have a Golbat from a previous set which can draw cards for us, which is always nice. The Crobat does a 50 damage attack for 2 colorless energy, and you can choose either item or supporter cards, and your opponent can no longer use that on the following turn. So it can create a really annoying lock, especially with hand disruptors here and there. There are a number of archetypes that rely on rare candy, and you can try and block that out the entire game as long as you get a Crobat up in time. So that's something that you can really bear in mind and end up having a pretty interesting matchup spread, really. With the combination of blocking supporters and items, you actually can catch many opponents in tough situations. The damage output is lacking though, so you're going to have to do something about that if you want to make this archetype work. I feel like Bombardier EX's fast carry attack isn't worth the payoff compared to just doing that VIP Battle Pass rat race, but it is an option, and if you do want to commit down this avenue, you probably want to play high counts of the Bombardier, so I would recommend getting 4 copies of this card alongside like Jet Energies and this, that, and the other to actually make it come off in every single game, so you're getting multiple basics down on the board pretty early, even if you have gone first. The Sandy Shocks EX feels like the worst of the 2 ancient EX Pokemon from this set. The fighting type coverage isn't all that relevant right now. 200 is also a pretty bad baseline of damage. Yes, it's a pretty tanky Pokemon when you consider it could get a plus 60 hit points from ancient booster energy capsules, but it's still not too much to write home about. So I feel like there aren't really as many payoffs as there are with a simple Roaring Moon EX build. Onto some tool cards then. We have the Devolution and Turbo Energize options. I think 2 copies of each of these makes a lot of sense. You're likely playing this alongside Town Store or Arven, so I think 2 is kind of on the high end for both of these cards, just to make sure you don't really prize one of them and can get them off in most situations. Devolution could be a pretty nice tech card for Mew against Arven Zards, because you can actually run them out of rare candies and therefore out of attackers, especially if you combine a Judge with a Devolution play. You can try and make it difficult for your opponent to bounce back on a single turn as well, which is exceptional. We also have a variety of archetypes which can spread all sorts of damage counters around, be it Iron Valiant variants, be it using Sableye, be it using Rapid Strike Urshifu and Inteleon, these sorts of decks. They could all look to have some sneaky Devolution endgame situations as well. The Turbo Energize is just for colorless energy, and it can get lots of energy into play, 2 in any combination to your bench Pokemon. This could be nice for some more awkward energy attacking decks that haven't really had a look in our format just yet. I'm still a little bit skeptical of this combination, especially because you can only activate it when you go second, of course, and still have access to it on that first turn. Otherwise, it's going to feel like a really slow option. So I feel committing completely down a Turbo Energized route is still a little bit risky. As it stands, I would play Techno Radar in exactly 0 decks, but I see the obvious potential here. If we get more future Pokemon, specifically if we get one that can draw any amount of cards, this card immediately power spikes and becomes exceptional. I'm cautiously saying 2 copies for now, just in case we do have that. Tulip's an interesting supporter card. It could be nice post-rotation once Clara goes, and it could keep some Psychic archetypes relevant. I feel like it's underpowered right now compared to other options in the format, though, the way we are building our deck lists. Defiance Band and Gorgeous Mantle both seem really good for controlling archetypes. The Mantle giving +100s to the likes of Aegislash, the likes of Block Snorlax. This could be really, really frustrating, and even if there are decent attackers that can get through these sorts of Pokemon, a Mantle then puts them well out of range and allows you to unlock Penny that little bit more within your deck list. So definitely a card that I have in mind. The Defiance Vest is a little bit less all-in than the Mantle. The -40 reduction is more versatile as well, of course, because it doesn't have to just be on non-rule boxes that a Mantle covers. So it can buff out some other Pokemon that could be decent in controlling style decks. Finally, we have a couple of nice gimmicky decks. I think the Garbodor Chuck deck, where you're trying to get rid of lots of leftovers over and over again, as well as other tools within the list, could be pretty interesting. Could work well with Defiance Vest as well, where you put yourself out of range of an Iron Hands, which is at least very relevant. There is a decent Trubbish from a previous set, I think that's Fusion Strike, where you have a Call for Family attack, which is at least something going for you. It's probably a little bit too much work compared to even things like Sizzle, which is a really efficient Stage 1 Pokemon, which currently isn't seeing a huge amount of play. So I feel like you have to warp your deck quite substantially to make this combination work, and it's not necessarily the best thing to go for. Clorf is another one of these kind of like awkward jump through some hoop style decks where we have to have double turbo energy to use its hysterical scissors. You also need to poison yourself with a brute bonnet or burn yourself with a spicy curry. So we're naturally warping our deck, playing these cards which aren't consistency based just to get this sort of combo off. There may be some attackers that you can pair with the Clorf and just have this pretty handy high damage output fighting type attacker for specific turns, but it's going to feel like a difficult Pokemon to use throughout the entirety of your game. We then have some interesting tech attacking Pokemon. Screamtail I feel is bad in Guardy for now, but might be decent in the future. Iron Jugglus I also think isn't all that great because at the moment Manaphy is everywhere, but again could be a good card in a different format or if things shape up in a certain way. And then Minior's actually a pretty decent card. I would say picking up one of these makes sense. Gives you some nice coverage against controlling archetypes if they get too crazy, because Minior can subvert the block lacks quite nicely, and it also could be helpful if you're looking to play Lost Zone box and you still expect a decent amount of colourless Lugia, because this is also a great Pokemon at getting through thumping Snorlax as well. So that's it for the Paradox Rift buy list. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know what you're going to be picking up. Are you a believer in any of the cards on this slide? And what do you think are the cream of the crop of the core essentials? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.